You are listening to the latest message from Bar None Cowboy Ministries, where we don't care about your past, but care about your future. We hope you are encouraged by today's message.
Go ahead and turn in your Bible to Revelation chapter 2. We will be parked here in Revelation chapter 2, probably, like I said, until about the end of October. We are talking about the 7 churches that are in Revelation. Last week we spoke about the church in Ephesus, and we talked about the church there, how they were under intense persecution, and that is kind of along the lines of where we are at today. This church here in Smyrna is a church that is under intense persecution. And when we read through the chapter, you're going to see that this is one of, I have to go back and look, but I think it's one of 2 churches that receive a letter but do not receive a condemnation from the Lord. It's only commending them for what they've done, not this I have against you. This is the 2nd church that has been listed in the letters, mainly because of the postal route. Remember the postal route of where these churches are located. Ephesus was first, so they received the letters firsthand, and then it went on to the next church. So Smyrna was the next city, and it was very important place for Asia. It was one of the largest cities there at the time, and it was the closest to being to Ephesus. It was about 40 miles to the north of the church in Ephesus. And so for this reason, the church was the 2nd of the 7 to receive these letters. And it was probably delivered there to a minister or by a minister or a messenger from the Ephesus church. And it was possibly given to them as a copy, or it could have been the original form, and a copy was made back at Ephesus for further study, because the whole book of Revelation went to Ephesus first, and then it went on to the next churches there. Does anybody know what the town name Smyrna is? What is the meaning of the name Smyrna? Myrrh. The town Smyrna actually means myrrh. What is myrrh? Myrrh. M-Y-R-R-H. Myrrh. It is a spice. What was the spice? For funerals. Okay, it was given to Jesus how many times? At least twice. It was one of the spices that was brought in by the kings, the wise kings at his birth, and it was also brought to him as he was. They were going to prepare him for his death, but guess what? He wasn't there. And so it was mainly known for embalming of the dead. It is a thorny plant, or it was a part of a tree. It grows about 8 or 9 feet tall, and it is found in Arabia and sometimes in the Palestine region as well. If you were to eat some myrrh, it would be very, very bitter. You would not want to eat it. So they found out if you were to crush this bark off of it, it would have a fragrant odor that was pleasing. And so the plant was crushed and bruised, so it will release these oils for the fragrance of myrrh. So this town is named Smyrna, which was synonymous with myrrh, but it is also a foreshadowing of how you get the myrrh from the plant of what is happening with the church. Okay, so what did I say? What you had to do with the plant? You had to crush it, you had to bruise it before the fragrance would be released. This church in Smyrna was crushed and bruised multiple times. They were underneath a lot of persecution. And so the result of their sufferings, it would be anointed for a death and burial, but it would end in a resurrection and a renewal of life. We know that because the Marys went out to go embalm Jesus because they didn't have enough time. And then guess what? He wasn't there. He was resurrected. And so these afflictions might be bitter for the victim, but it would result in releasing a perfume or fragrance that is pleasing to heaven. Smyrna is one of the oldest cities in the world. And in fact, they have found coins that have the inscription on them claiming that it was one of the oldest cities in Asia. And they are very eventful in history, especially with the martyrdom of believers and of Christians. And we're going to talk about that persecution here in a minute. Smyrna was the birthplace of a guy by the name of Homer. Does anybody know who Homer was? Not Homer Simpson. Okay. He wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. It was a center, it was a town that celebrated its wealth, science, and philosophy. So it was known for their schools and stuff. They medical schools were there, science schools were there, and so a lot of people came in for that. They had magnificent temples, they had sacred festivals, and then they had some athletic contests because of the Greek influence to them. It was situated around a mountain called Mount Pagos, which now, if you were to look at a map, you can't find Mount Pagos. You can find it as, I'm going to butcher this name because it is in Turkey. It is Kadifikal, whatever it is. But it is situated there. The town of Smyrna is still there today, but it is not known as Smyrna. In AD 23, there was a great temple that was built there, and it was dedicated to the Emperor Tiberius. Okay, these are important information to know about because when the Roman Empire started to spread, they did so through conquest of the towns and the area. That's how they, even in today's way, Russia's starting to forcefully take over parts of Ukraine. To gain land, the Roman Empire started to forcefully take over these areas. And so in the Roman Empire, they had emperors. And Tiberius was one of those. Mount Pegasus, or Pagos, was a mountain that was about 500 feet high. And it was located in the center of the city. And on top of that mountain, there was a shrine that was dedicated to the Greek god Nemesis. Nemesis was supposed to be a form of the Greek goddess Artemis. If you remember in Ephesus last week, we talked about the Greek goddess Artemis. This was a form of that Greek goddess. And the splendor and the magnificent buildings that were built up around Mount Pagos kind of created a crown. If you were to look at it at that time, it kind of created a crown on top of the hilltop. It is called and also known as the crown of Smyrna. You may not think that is important right now, but it is an allusion into the letter that we're going to read. There was a street of gold that was mentioned here that led to the temples that was there. Wasn't technically a street actually made of gold, but where do we hear streets of gold at? Well, okay. There was I'm going to skip that part. The city was called the Crown of Iona, which also means Smyrna. And the historical background gives a significance to the promise of Jesus, as we will see in this letter. The local church was repeatedly crushed and bruised by lots of persecution, and it was several times the church was basically almost fully destroyed, but yet it lived on and continued to go forward. It felt its full force of the persecution in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Smyrna was home of an archbishop by the name of Polycarp. Polycarp was the first bishop there for the church, and he was martyred. He was probably the most famous martyr that happened there in Smyrna, and he died in 168 AD. When he was burned at the stake, his words were quoted as saying, "I have served my master for 86 years. Why would I recant him now?" So he was there at the time when John wrote this letter to them. Many people believe that Polycarp was the angel or the minister, like we had talked about before, of the church when this letter was delivered. Now, I'm going to read a little bit, not all of it. I found this article from PBS. So think about the place where you got it from. But it was about persecution in the Roman Empire at the time and how it happened. And so Roman persecution, when they went and conquered these areas, to make them as allies, they would kind of agree upon the religions that were already set in place. Okay, so not to kind of stir up more revolts, they would kind of let them kind of do a little bit of their own, but yet also putting their own gods in as well. And so this is important because a lot of the area was underneath the Roman Empire during the early church period. And the Jews, they were dispersed from Jerusalem very early on in the church era. And when they were dispersed, they had to go to different places. That was controlled by the Roman Empire. And so the Roman Empire, they kind of agreed with letting the Jews still have their own religion. And so they basically just tolerated them. You know, they didn't force their religion upon them, but they just kind of tolerated them. And so in return, like in a good faith measure, the Romans would build temples and made animal sacrifices for the conquered people's gods. In fact, at various times, other people's gods became widely popular amongst the Romans. The Romans actually identified with Greek gods with their own, like Jupiter and Zeus. When Greco-Roman gods did not meet their needs, many Romans joined mystery cults from the east. In 63 BC, the Romans conquered Judea, the land of the Jews. Rome immediately recognized it and had a problem because the Jews refused to pay homage to the Roman gods. Rome gave in and exempted the Jews from this requirement. They did this because the Jews played a big part in helping Julius Caesar defeat an important battle years before Judea was conquered. And so soon Rome recognized Judaism as a legal religion, allowing the Jews to worship freely. They would allow the Jews to worship freely, but then there was this group that came up amongst the Jews called Christians, or the Way. This way we know as, it's not Judaism, it is not Jewish, but it has its roots in Jewish theology. So when the Romans heard about this new religion coming out, they would kind of let it be swept under the rug, thinking it was just another sect of Judaism. However, one big issue came about. Christians said that Christ is Lord and no one else. When the Romans heard about this, do you think that they were happy? Because the emperors at the time considered themselves as gods. And so they did not quite like this. And of course, with the revolts that some of the Jews were having against the Roman Empire at that time, they outlawed Christianity underneath Nero. And so on the night of July 18th, AD 64, a fire began in the area of the Circus Maximus, in that great arena in Rome for chariot races and games. The fire spread quickly and for 6 days consumed much of the city, including Emperor Nero's palace. Immediately, the rumor spread that Nero himself has caused a great fire to clear the space for a new place. What do you think Nero's reaction was when he heard these rumors going on? It would be just the exact same thing. And I can open up a can of worms right here, and I'll open them up and we'll set them out later. But there are people that claim that September 11th was an inside job from the government so they can go get the oil over in the Middle East. It would be about the same thing if that actually were to happen. Okay, Nero did not like this rumor that was going around. So fearful Roman mobs would turn on him. Nero cast about he looked around for a scapegoat to blame for the fire. Who did he blame? The Christians. Christians made an easy target for this scapegoating. The common people of Rome believed rumors about Christians, and some thought Christians practiced cannibalism because of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. It was going around that, hey, these guys here actually eat and drink the body of the Lord. So they think that this is cannibalism going around. It's easy to turn on them. Okay? Nero would then capture the Christians and outlaw Christianity throughout the Roman Empire. He would capture them. He would feed them to as entertainment in the Colosseum. He would also light them on fire to act as torches in his garden area. And this would continue on even after Nero's death. Christians lived underneath that persecution for a long time. In 110 AD, which is after Revelation came about, Emperor Trajan attempted to reach a compromise between the growing Christian minority and the Roman pagans, and he demanded that the illegal religious sect be destroyed to finish them off. And it continued to happen, this persecution continued to happen for over 100 years after that. It wasn't until 305, following the Roman Emperor Diocletian, after his retirement, a civil war broke out to determine his successor. It raged for almost a decade, for 10 years. Keep that in mind, 10 years. Okay, how many years? 10, okay. Even so, the persecution of Christians continued. It wasn't until Constantine in 311 who had a vision to win the important battle that he fought underneath the sign of the cross. Constantine then came and settled things down with Christians. Okay? How many years? 10. All right. Let's look at Revelation chapter 2. And that is very important to know about the persecution that was going on, because that is the main reason we see these letters being written to these churches. You know the history behind it, so now you can understand what is being written to them. To the church in Smyrna, verse 8. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last, who died and came to life. It is very interesting to note, all 7 churches that have been written letters, there is a characteristic that Jesus used of himself that is mentioned in chapter 1. Okay? That is very interesting to note. This one is the first and the last. Where else do we hear that? I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, and the end. So we know this is directly Jesus talking to them. I know your tribulation. What tribulation? Their persecution that was happening. And your poverty. But you are rich. Well, that's kind of contradictory right there, isn't it? Physically, they were poor. They were broke. They were in poverty. But yet they were rich. What were they rich in? Faith. Faith. That is exactly what Christ is talking about. They might be poor and broke as all get out, but they had a lot of faith. They continued to endure this persecution. And the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. This is talking about specific Jews. Okay? The slander that was going on was like what I said earlier, that they were eating and they were cannibals, that they were promiscuous in their deeds, in their acts. This slander was happening from inside of what we would call, quote unquote, religious church. The Jews were doing this. But why were they called the synagogue of Satan? Because these Jews that were doing this, not all Jews, but these Jews that were doing this, said that they were Jews maybe only physically, but they had no belief in the traditions that they had held. It's kind of like there's people that are in churches today that call themselves Christians, but yet they don't believe and continue on. So these Jews that are spreading this stuff, Christ is saying that they are from the synagogue of Satan. And this is the first place that we see where persecution comes from. Where does persecution come from? Satan. Satan. Why were they poor? Why do you think that they were poor? I have a theory on this. And this theory, we can see it through history. We can actually see it through history. The mark of the beast that is mentioned later on in Revelation. I do believe this is a futuristic book, okay? But the mark of the beast says you can neither buy nor sell unless you were to have this mark placed upon your head or your hand. Interesting to note, at this time when these people would be reading this letter, they would understand specifically what they were talking about. Maybe not that it was future, but it was also present time. Why? Because if they did not acknowledge the Roman emperor as God, they could not buy nor sell. And even more so, some of the Greeks that came in, they brought their own gods. And their own gods had this own mark that they would have had. If you agreed with their gods and you were in fellowship with their gods with this mark, you would be able to buy or sell to them. Once a year, everybody in that area, in those towns, had to show acknowledgement for their belief that saying the emperor, whoever it was, is God. They would have to go take a pinch of some sort of incense or something of that sort, kind of like what we talked about last week with Ephesus, and they'd have to put it into a fire, and they would claim that Emperor so-and-so is God. They would receive a letter or some sort of mark showing that they are good for that whole year. Then guess what? They can go and buy and sell in the marketplaces. But for Christians, they believe who is Lord? Christ is Lord. So they would not do that. They would not go after this. In fact, that is actually what started Polycarp, why he died. He would not recant his faith at that moment. So it's interesting to see Mark of the Beast could be one of two things. Okay, I believe it's a futuristic book. I do believe that we're going to come underneath this at one point in time. But at this moment, when these people read this, they knew exactly what was happening because they could not buy or sell unless they acknowledged the emperor as Lord. Verse 10, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested. For 10 days you will have tribulation. This could mean one of two things. 10 days at that time period just really meant for a short period of time. We also see 10 days as mentioned in Daniel, when Daniel was going up against the emperor at the time, and he said, hey, why don't you test us for 10 days and only feed us vegetables instead of meat, and you will see how we are going to be stronger than the rest of your men. So it could mean as a short period of time that they were going to be thrown into prison. Roman prison was only a holding area before they were to be going to be tried and their sentence given to them. This 10 days could also mean how many years that they were dealing with? 10 years of the tribulation of intense persecution. Okay? So it could mean one of those two things. Either one. So do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, and that you may be tested. How did they get myrrh? Broken. Abused. That is how they were being tested. Why? With myrrh, so it would release the fragrance. Persecution always multiplies a church. It will never, ever take it away. Persecution always multiplies a church. And that is exactly what is happening right at this moment. What do you mean?
Clarify persecution. How that multiplies the church. Clarify that.
How it happens? Even in today's standards, if the church may not be able to be out in the open at the moment, but it's being driven underground because of the testing of people's faith, the persecution, that shows who truly are the real believers in Christ. That in itself, what are we called to do? make disciples of all nations. That, in turn, will show the strength of the church. No, in fact, right now, even in China, how some of them are going, they're called the underground church, but yet they will change up their meeting places from week to week, and it will be spread through, kind of like how rumors spread through here, by word of mouth. And then it is a visible church. When I say underground, they don't dig a hole and go underneath it, but they just meet in an area that is not open. Like if we were to be persecuted, and this is one thing that we have, as Americans, we have been freed from at this moment, because there's a lot of persecution even happening right now, even in Africa, India, China, Russia, all over the world. And if you were to look at their stats of where Christianity is booming, it is in those places right there where they are being persecuted at. So here, if we were to be persecuted, we would no longer be able to meet at 9980 U.S. Highway 259 North. We would have to go somewhere else. And every week that would change, whether it's home or some of the other sort. But through persecution, that is where you have your faith and where you are fully reliant on Christ carrying it through. Does that make a little bit more sense? Not yet? But he said tribulation right here. Can you hold that for just a minute? It says tribulation right here. And he says, be faithful unto death. Because a lot of them may end up being death. He will give you the crown of life. This is probably not a physical crown, but it is like a wreath that is given to the winners at the Olympic Games at that moment, showing that they were victorious in overcoming what was going on. Ron? And it's always, when that stuff happens, it is always why. That is probably not for us to understand. Why persecution? You would think persecution would just kill something off and it would be gone. But it is the only thing where it never does. It always multiplies a church. It multiplies somewhere else. Why? Because Christ is the one that's over it. He's the head of it.
What do you think's happening in the United States of America?
I believe a majority of the churches that are in America aren't real churches. Let's go to verse 11. Hold on. The majority of churches in America today are bending to the culture. They're bending over to them. You see these churches that are exploding in numbers. Mainly, they are giving them what they want to hear, what people want to hear. And so they are exploding in number because we don't talk about the harsh realities of what real sin is. And when people do talk about what real sin is, guess what happens? You get shunned. And when you get shunned, that is a form of persecution. It is not, having to stand before a council and denounce your faith and be burned at the stake. But the real truth, like I said, there's probably only maybe about 20% of churches in America that call themselves churches are actual true churches. We know this even in our church attendance stuff. Not everybody who comes to church is saved or going to be saved. We do, absolutely. We take that for granted because we've been given that pass of the persecution. I do believe in the near future. Something's gonna happen where it's gonna change. Because if you looked at the last school shooting at the church there, why is most all of these shootings that you see, especially in religious, you don't see any mass shootings at a mosque. You don't see any mass shootings in a Buddhist temple. You don't see any of these mass shootings at other places. You'll see them at other public schools, but when it comes to religion, it is always in the Christianity realm, and the Jewish area, in the whole Christianity realm. The ones that claim that there is one God, that is the one that they come after. Why? Because I truly believe Satan and the demons are behind a lot of this. I truly believe this last mass shooter was demonic. Not only was he demonic, I believe he was possessed. But these demons, they know what the outcome is going to be. They don't have to go after, is that a little lizard or a snake? A little lizard? So these demons know that they don't have to go after, that they don't have to go after these other churches like Islam or Buddhism or any of these other things, because why? They know that the God that they worship is not the true God. Verse 11, and then we gotta watch this video. We gotta watch this video. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the, what does it say right there? Churches, plural. It is even plural in the original language. Churches, not church. Churches. That also means it was passed around to every single 7 church right there, but it was also meant for all of us as well. The one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. So the one who perseveres through persecution will also gain the crown of life and also be able to eat from the tree of life, like we mentioned last week in Ephesus. All right, you ready to see what the church or what Ephesus looks like today? Smyrna.
We thank you for listening to today's message at Bar None Cowboy Ministries in Omaha, Texas. We invite you to connect with us on Facebook or YouTube. We hope that you were encouraged by today's message.